Hey there, sleepyheads, and welcome back to Boring History for Sleep. As the world outside begins to quiet and perhaps you're settling into your own comfortable space, we're going to gently drift back in time to an era where comfort was a rare luxury, and the journey itself was often the greatest adversary. Tonight we're peeling back the layers of a life that was anything but boring yet which we will explore with the measured calm you've come to expect. So allow your mind to softly drift as we journey back to the brutal, perilous reality of life as a 17th century Dutch VOC sailor tracing a farm boy's transformation through hardship and profound personal cost. You're Jan, a young man from a small farming village north of Rotterdam. Your days are spent toiling in the damp, manure-scented fields of rural Holland, a routine as predictable as the tides, yet far less exciting. The endless monotony of this agrarian life gnaws at you each sunrise, bringing the same chores, the same smells of damp earth and livestock, the same quiet certainty of a future precisely like your past. But then there's the talk. Whispers of the Dutch East India Company, the VOC, drift like exotic spices through your village, carried on the occasional breeze from the distant ports. It's a colossal, almost mythical entity, its very name synonymous with vast wealth and global reach. For you and other young men like you, the VOC represents more than just a company. It's an intoxicating escape, a shimmering mirage of opportunity against the backdrop of your humble, predictable existence. Recruiters with their loud voices and even louder promises paint vivid, enticing pictures. They speak of riches beyond imagination, tales of spices, silks, and fortunes grand enough to buy entire farms. They tell you of distant lands, sun-drenched islands where gold grows on trees and precious stones litter the beaches. You listen wide-eyed to stories of men who left with nothing and returned as lords, their pockets bulging, their futures secured. This carefully cultivated perception, however, cunningly masks a brutal reality of systemic exploitation and peril that awaits those who dare to sign on. It's a truth conveniently omitted from the recruiters' gilded promises, a detail they conveniently forget to mention amidst the grandeur and the glitter. You hear the words, and a part of you, the part desperate for something more, wants to believe them entirely, ignoring the quiet, nagging doubt that whispers of a different, harder truth. You're drawn in not just by the promise of wealth, but by the allure of a world beyond your small farm, a world where your own story might finally be written far from the mud and the cows. You can almost feel the deck beneath your feet, the salt spray on your face, the distant echoes of adventure calling you away. This promise, however enticing, is merely the first layer of a profound hierarchy and exploitation that begins long before you even set foot on the sea. Before you can even dream of the open sea, before the salt spray can truly touch your face, you find yourself caught in the first, most insidious net of the VOC's grand design. You've heard the stories, yes, but now you see the mechanism firsthand. The VOC's massive global operations, you discover, aren't just built on daring voyages and exotic spices. They are underpinned by a rigid, almost invisible hierarchy that funnels desperate men like you into its gaping maw, particularly through a system whispered about in hushed tones, the soul cellar, or crimper system. Think of it as a gatekeeper, but one who demands an exorbitant toll not just for passage, but for the very idea of it. Figures like Hendrik van Groot are not merely recruiters. They are predatory intermediaries, almost like human shepherds herding the desperate towards the company's waiting ships. You encounter a man like this perhaps in a taverna near the bustling docks of Amsterdam. He has a glint in his eye, a practiced smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes, and a hand always ready to offer another tankard of cheap ale. He delivers men, poor souls like you, to the VOC for a substantial fee. Perhaps 150 guilders per man, a sum you can barely conceive of in your agrarian life. On top of that, another 50 guilders for your room and board, a dingy corner in a communal cellar for a few nights while the paperwork is handled. You'd think this would be paid by the company, a recruitment bonus perhaps. No. These fees, you quickly learn, are immediately deducted from your future wages, Before you've even set foot on a ship, before you've earned a single coin, you're already deeply in debt to the company. It's an inescapable cycle designed to bind you to ensure your loyalty not through good treatment but through sheer financial obligation. You realise with a bitter taste in your mouth you've just forged your first chains. The days leading up to your signing become a blur of cheap potent alcohol. You're often kept drunk, disoriented perhaps, confined in dank airless cellars, the kind that perpetually smell of stale beer, unwashed bodies, and the underlying dampness of desperation. In this haze, you're presented with contracts, dense pages of legal text you can barely read, let alone comprehend. Your hand, perhaps a little shaky from the drink signs away your future. Your hopes, your dreams of riches are tied to clauses you don't understand, to obligations that are already weighing you down. You're signing on the dotted line, but your future has already been sold piece by piece long before you ever set foot on a ship. This immediate profound powerlessness within the company's structure is a stark, chilling revelation. You thought you were escaping. Instead, you've simply walked into a different kind of cage, one built of paper and debt. As you slowly emerge from the haze of the Crimpers cellars, perhaps with a throbbing headache and a vague sense of unease, another division becomes strikingly clear. You're now part of the company, yes, but you're not of the company in the same way. There are others, a distinct class of individuals who will enjoy a very different reality on the waves, a hierarchy even more defined by the privilege of rank. As you step onto the swaying deck of a VOC East Indiaman, a behemoth of timber and canvas, the world shifts beneath your feet, not just with the motion of the waves, but with the sudden stark clarity of a deeply ingrained social divide. Within this vast floating world, you quickly learn a chasm separates officers from common sailors, a gulf as wide and deep as the ocean itself. It's not just a matter of rank, but of perceived humanity of value. You, the recruit, are immediately relegated to the lowest rung, indistinguishable from the dozens of other men crammed onto the deck, all awaiting their orders. You observe the officers, their crisp uniforms a stark contrast to your own rough, ill-fitting clothes, their movements imbued with an undeniable authority. They carry themselves with an air of command, their voices accustomed to being obeyed, their presence a constant, unwavering reminder of who holds the reins of power on this wooden beast. You watch them even as you're handed a bucket for the first of countless scrubbing tasks. Their living conditions, you notice, are vastly superior. While you'll eventually find yourself sleeping shoulder to shoulder on the hard deck deep below the waterline, the officers enjoy private cabins, or at the very least far more spacious and airy quarters. The faint scents of their cooked meals waft occasionally from their mess, a tantalising aroma that rarely if ever makes its way to the common crew. You might even catch a glimpse of them enjoying fresh fruit, or a splash of clean water for longer into the voyage, while your own rations have already begun their inevitable decline. This preferential treatment extends beyond mere comfort. It's a symbolic declaration, a daily tangible demonstration of their elevated status. They are entitled to a different kind of existence, a buffer against the grim realities that define your own. Their authority, you quickly come to understand, is absolute, almost dictatorial. The captain's word, filtered through the first mate and other officers, permeates every aspect of shipboard life. From the grand sweep of navigation, plotting a course across uncharted waters, to the minutiae of daily tasks, the setting of sails, the swabbing of decks, the endless coiling of ropes, every command originates from them. Their orders are to be obeyed without question, instantly, unflinchingly. You learn this not through polite instruction, but through sharp shouts, glares, and the swift, brutal consequences of hesitation or perceived insubordination. A misplaced foot, a fumbled knot, a moment of confusion, these can all draw a scathing rebuke, or worse, a crack of a lash meant to engrave obedience into your very being. This clear line of demarcation is not merely about rank, or the necessity of military discipline on a vessel. It's about the intrinsic value placed on lives. You, the common sailor, are regarded as little more than an expendable labour unit, a cog in the vast profit-driven machine of the VOC. Your individual life, your well-being, your aspirations, these are secondary if they are considered tall. The officers, on the other hand, are the guardians of the company's investment, the navigators of its destiny, their lives weighted with a different kind of importance. It's a stark contrast to their privileged existence, the undeniable reality that some lives on this ship are simply valued more than others. You feel this unspoken judgment settle upon you, a heavy cloak that whispers of your own insignificance in the grand scheme of things. This pervasive sense of expendability will follow you through every grueling watch, every meagre meal, a constant companion that reminds you of your precarious place, not just on this ship, but in the entire audacious enterprise of the VOC. You, the common sailor, are positioned at the absolute lowest rung of the VOC's vast operational structure. It's a bitter truth that settles deep in your bones. You're regarded almost as an expendable commodity, a replaceable part in a massive churning machine built for profit. This isn't just a feeling, it's an unspoken company policy woven into the very fabric of their business model. You might think surely human life would be valued above all else. You'd be wrong. For the VOC, the staggering mortality rate that plagues its voyages, the chilling statistic that 1/3 of all Dutch sailors never made it back home, is factored in almost casually as a mere cost of doing business. It's a line item in a ledger, not a lament. You are less a person, and more a statistic waiting to be fulfilled. In essence, you're just another piece of cargo, a living one perhaps, but ultimately a resource to be spent. Imagine for a moment the cold, calculating mind of a merchant in Amsterdam. He's looking at projections at the cost of timber for a new ship, the price of spices in the east, the expected return on investment. And somewhere in that ledger, probably not even in bold print, is an allowance for human loss. It's a pragmatic rather than malicious indifference. Your life, your dreams, your future are weighed against the immense profits to be gained from a single shipload of pepper or nutmeg. The scales, you quickly realise, are tipped heavily in favour of the spice. This systemic disregard for individual well-being underscores a profound lack of value placed on a sailor's life, transforming men like you into mere numbers in the relentless pursuit of immense profit. This isn't just an abstract concept. It's a constant, pervasive undercurrent that shapes your every waking moment and even your fitful sleep. The psychological impact of this expendability is a heavy, unspoken burden on every crew member. You look at the man next to you, perhaps a new recruit like yourself, full of wide-eyed hope, or an older, grizzled veteran whose eyes hold the quiet resignation of someone who has seen too many friends disappear beneath the waves. You wonder, will it be him? Will it be me? This isn't morbid curiosity. It's a practical, desperate assessment of odds, a constant negotiation with fate. Each cough, each rash, each moment of dizziness becomes a terrifying omen. You find yourself scrutinizing your own body for any telltale sign of the dreaded diseases that sweep through ships, knowing that if you fall ill, you might just become another number in that grim third. There's no grand fanfare for your potential sacrifice, no medals for enduring the slow, agonizing decline of scurvy. Just a quiet, unceremonious slide into the deep, or a shallow grave in foreign soil. This constant awareness of your own insignificance, of your replaceability, breeds a peculiar form of fatalism. You learn to live in the present, to focus on the immediate task, because the future is so uncertain, so precarious. It strips away any romantic notions you might have clung to about the sea, replacing them with a stark, brutal realism. Your sense of self shrinks, conforming to the narrow confines of your purpose, to labour to survive, and to contribute to the company's wealth, however small your part. You come to accept that your individual story is secondary to the larger narrative of the VOC's global dominance. And this dominance, you'll discover, isn't confined to the open ocean or the grim logic of its accounting books. It extends its iron grip even to the briefest moments of respite, even to the distant shores where you might dream of temporary freedom. you'll soon see how the company's influence reaches far beyond the ship's railing, dictating terms and controlling lives even in the most opulent foreign cities. After months at sea, battling scurvy storms and the endless monotony of the open ocean, the sight of land, any land, is a miracle. But the land that finally materializes on the horizon, the opulent colonial capital of Batavia, isn't a true escape. As your ship finally drops anchor, you quickly understand that the VOC's influence here is not merely strong. It is absolute, extending far beyond the bustling docks to every facet of urban life. You might have thought that once you stepped off the ship you'd be free, at least for a little while, from the company's iron grip. You'd be wrong. Here even the air seems to carry the scent of Dutch enterprise and control a pervasive presence that reminds you even on solid ground of your contractual obligations. From the deck, before you're even allowed ashore, you can see it all. The imposing fort, its stone walls gleaming in the tropical sun, dominates the skyline bristling with cannons. Grand administrative buildings, their Dutch gables, a strangely familiar sight in this faraway land, stand proudly, and everywhere the red, white and blue of the Dutch flag snaps defiantly in the breeze. These aren't just buildings. They're colossal symbols of the company's pervasive control over the entire economy of the region, and by extension, over its vast workforce, which includes you. You're after all merely a tiny, albeit essential part of the machinery that allows these grand structures to exist, that allows these flags to fly. This isn't just a port, it's a meticulously constructed VOC dominion, a mirror image of the company's headquarters back in Amsterdam, but transplanted to the exotic humid East. This pervasive power extends directly to your own limited experience of the city. The VOC maintains strict trade monopolies, ensuring that the flow of lucrative spices and other commodities remains firmly in its hands. Any dream you might have entertained of striking it rich quickly, perhaps by selling some trinket or trading on the side, is swiftly curtailed by the visible presence of company guards and the knowledge of their severe punishments. Even more directly, your precious shore leave, that brief longed-for respite, is meticulously controlled. You're granted leave, but only in strict shift and never too many men at once. This isn't for your leisure, it's a calculated measure to prevent desertion. The threats are clear, often delivered by a gruff officer during muster attempts at desertion, will be met with severe punishment, perhaps even hanging a fate that would make the dangers of the sea seem preferable. You watch as a man who overstayed his leave by a few hours is brought back pale and sweating to face a public lashing. The message is loud and clear: you're still company property even when your feet are on land. So while Batavia offers a tantalizing glimpse of civilization, of different cultures, of fresh food, and perhaps a fleeting moment with a woman of questionable virtue, you remain tethered, your movements monitored, your freedoms restricted. The deep impact of the company's reach on the lives of its employees is evident in every strict rule, every watchful eye, every whispered warning about the consequences of stepping out of line. You've journeyed halfway across the world only to find the same system of control, the same hierarchy, merely dressed in different, more exotic finery. This realization settles heavily a reminder that your economic purpose, your very existence, is inextricably linked to the VOC's insatiable quest for profit. And it is this quest for profit, this immense engine of wealth, that truly underpins every single grueling mile you've just sailed. You've now seen the imposing face of the VOC in Batavia, its power radiating from the fort and its grand buildings. But what truly fuels this empire? What is the core engine that propels you, a mere farm boy, across vast dangerous oceans? The answer you quickly discover lies in something far smaller, far more aromatic and infinitely more valuable than you could have ever imagined: spices. The VOC's immense wealth, its very existence, is driven by a ruthless and astonishingly successful monopoly on the incredibly lucrative spice trade from the East Indies. Imagine the entire world's spice cabinet, but each pinch is worth a king's ransom. That is the secret of the VOC, a more fragrant perhaps, but no less powerful equivalent to controlling all the oil wells of our own era. Back in Amsterdam, in the elegant merchant houses along the canals, pepper, nutmeg, cinnamon and cloves fetch prices so enormous they almost defy belief. A small sack of nutmeg, for instance, could buy you a small house, or at least keep your family fed for a year back in Holland. This isn't just trade, it's an alchemy of rarity and desire, transforming dried berries and bark into veritable gold. You begin to grasp the sheer audacity of this enterprise. Thousands of miles sailed, hundreds of lives risked, all for these fragrant commodities. This quest for exotic commodities isn't merely a business venture. It's the primary economic engine, the throbbing heart that justifies the company's vast, almost unimaginable investment in its colossal fleet, and critically in its human resources, which of course includes you. The cost in terms of ships lost and lives extinguished is simply factored into the price of a cargo, a grim calculation that underscores the immense value placed on these fragrant treasures. You might find yourself scrubbing a deck, the tropical sun beating down, and a thought might drift through your mind, all this for a few peppercorns. But it's not just a few. Its entire holds filled to bursting, each barrel and bale a testament to the immense profit awaiting them back in Europe. This scale of operation, this single-minded focus on a handful of agricultural products, is what sets the VOC apart. They control the source, they control the transport, and crucially, they control the market, ensuring no competitor can undermine their prices. It's a masterclass in global capitalism, albeit one built on the backs of men like you. You learn to recognize the subtle scents that cling to the air around the cargo holds. The sharp, pungent aroma of pepper, the sweet, earthy smell of nutmeg, the warm embrace of cinnamon. These aren't just smells anymore. They are the tangible indicators of the company's power. The very reason you are here thousands of miles from home. The company's investment in its fleet is staggering. Imagine the cost of building these massive East Indiamen, each one a floating fortress capable of weathering storms and warding off pirates. Then consider the provisions for voyages that last for years, the wages for officers, the armaments, the upkeep. It's an enterprise of monumental scale, and every guilder spent, every timber laid, every sail hoisted is ultimately in service of bringing those precious spices back to European markets. Your own body, your labour, your very life is simply another component in this vast economic equation. You are a tool, a necessary expense to ensure the spices reach their destination. And as you become more accustomed to the rhythm of the ship, to the constant reminders of the company's overarching purpose, you can't help but wonder about your own small part in this grand scheme. You volunteered for this, of course, lured by promises of riches. But what exactly does that promise mean for an individual sailor for you when the scale of the enterprise is so immense and the stakes so high? You joined the VOC, didn't you, lured by the siren song of untold wealth? For you, Jan, and countless other men like you, the primary economic incentive wasn't just adventure, it was the elusive promise of personal fortune. The recruiters, with their slick tongues and grand embellishments, had spun romanticised tales of men returning to Holland with enough wealth to buy entire farms, transforming their humble origins into lives of landed gentry. This was the dream, the potent elixir that fueled your initial desperation to escape the grinding poverty of agrarian life. You imagined yourself stepping off a ship, a changed man, your pockets jingling, your head held high, ready to prove to your family and your village that you had made it. It was the ultimate rags to riches fantasy, a stark contrast to the mud and the cows. This dream, however, was often little more than an illusion, a cruel mirage shimmering on the distant horizon. The reality you encountered even before the ship had truly left the sight of land was far grimmer. The exploitative wage system, coupled with those initial crippling deductions for the crimpers' fees, meant that your earnings were effectively mortgaged before you even started. Imagine working for months, for years, only to find that a significant portion of your pay has already been earmarked to settle a debt you barely remember incurring, probably while in a drunken haze. It's a bitter pill to swallow, a constant reminder that you are perpetually playing catch-up, always in the red before you even begin to count your actual take-home. Then there's the staggering mortality rate. 1/3 of all sailors, they say, never make it back. You hear the whispers, you see the grim faces of the veterans, and the chilling truth starts to sink in. Even if you manage to endure the relentless labour, the brutal conditions, the constant threat of disease and storm, what are the odds you'll actually survive to collect your meagre wages? And even if you do survive, how much will truly be left after years of deductions, after paying for the provisions that were often barely edible? The dream of buying an entire farm, of returning a wealthy man, begins to fade, replaced by the far more pressing goal of simply surviving to see your homeland again. Few ordinary sailors ever truly achieve the riches they envisioned. Their meagre wages constantly eroded by company policies, and the ever-present threat of debt highlighted the profound gap between the promise and the reality of economic gain. You might arrive in Batavia having endured a harrowing journey, only to find that your payout is barely enough for a few days of luxury, certainly not enough to change your life. And then you have to face the prospect of the return journey, another gauntlet of dangers. Another year or more of your life spent in brutal conditions for the promise of more meagre wages. The illusion shatters, replaced by the hard, cold truth you're a labour unit, and your reward is often just enough to ensure you remain available for the next voyage, forever chasing a phantom fortune. You begin to understand that for men like you, the true riches were not gold or silver, but simply the ability to put food on the table, to escape the cycle of debt, and perhaps, just perhaps, to tell the tale of your survival. And this survival, you're quickly learning, hinges on the careful, often brutal management of every single resource on board. The dream of riches, as you now realise, is largely a cruel joke played on men like you. But on board the VOC ship, a far more immediate and visceral reality takes hold: resource management, or rather the stark absence of it, for common sailors, defined by extreme scarcity and rapid deterioration. You quickly learn that survival isn't about grand strategies, but about the minute-by-minute struggle for the most basic necessities, starting with water. Your body, already weakened by the early stages of the voyage, cries out for hydration, a primal need that becomes a constant gnawing ache. Drinking water, the very essence of life, is stored in massive wooden casks deep in the hold. You picture it dark and cool, perhaps even imagining it fresh. But the reality is far from it. After just a month at sea, sometimes even less, the water in those casks turns foul. You'd expect it to simply taste stale, perhaps a little woody. Instead, it becomes thick with algae and wriggling with tiny creatures, a greenish, viscous liquid that churns your stomach before it even touches your lips. Imagine bringing a cup to your mouth, seeing those small, indistinct shapes moving within, knowing that this is your only option. You learn to filter it through gritted teeth, often using a piece of cloth, or even your shirt, to strain out the worst of the impurities. It's a disgusting, desperate ritual, repeated several times a day, each swallow a testament to your will to survive. The brackish, often rancid liquid scalds your throat, leaving a metallic, bitter aftertaste that lingers long after you've emptied your cup. During extreme rationing, which becomes a chillingly common occurrence in the longer stretches of the voyage, the scarcity of water transcends mere discomfort and spirals into outright desperation. You witness men, normally quiet and resigned, transformed into feral beasts, fighting over the last drops in the bottom of the drinking barrel. A thrown punch, a shouted curse, a desperate scramble, all for a few millilitres of foul, barely potable water. These aren't just squabbles, they are visceral examples of how basic necessities become sources of brutal conflict and profound suffering, stripping away the thin veneer of civility that might have once existed. You find yourself guarding your own ration, even a single cup, with a fierce protectiveness, your eyes darting around wary of others. The sun beats down, the air is thick with the stench of the ship, and your lips are perpetually cracked and dry. You fantasize about cool, fresh spring water, about a deep, long drink that doesn't leave you feeling dirtier than before. But those are mere dreams. The reality is the brackish, teeming liquid, the desperate fights, the constant gnawing thirst. This isn't just about thirst. It's about control, about the company's ability to reduce your existence to the absolute minimum to ensure your focus remains solely on the immediate desperate struggle for survival. And if water, the most fundamental of needs, is so brutally managed, you can only imagine what awaits you at mealtimes. You prepare yourself for another assault on your senses, another grim reminder of your place on this ship, and of the harsh realities of life on the high seas. If your hopes for fresh, clean water were quickly dashed, your expectations for food, you'll discover are equally grim, if not worse. The company's provisions, designed for long-term storage and minimal cost, are a far cry from the hearty if simple meals you remember from your farm. Here aboard the Batavia's Pride, every meal is an exercise in endurance, a test of your stomach and your will. You quickly learn to eat not for pleasure, but purely for survival, pushing down the revulsion that often rises in your throat. Breakfast. The day's first assault on your senses is typically a grey slop of porridge. You might expect something warm and comforting, a basic sustenance. Instead, it's often dotted with unidentifiable lumps that would crunch between your teeth. You try not to look too closely, a veteran sailor, Cornelis, having already given you the grim advice. Don't look too closely, lad. The less you know, the easier it is to swallow. You follow his words, forcing down the gritty, tasteless mass, hoping desperately that those lumps are merely burnt oats and not some kind of extra protein that might scurry away if startled. The very act of eating becomes a challenge, a negotiation with your palate and your stomach, urging them to accept what they're given, no matter how unappetizing. Dinner at noon offers no reprieve. It typically consists of salt beef or pork so briny it made your lips crack. The preservation method, heavy salting, leaves the meat impossibly tough and painfully salty, demanding immense effort to chew and swallow. You struggle to saw through a piece of it with your dull knife, your jaw aching with the effort, the taste leaving your mouth parched and your lips chapped. And then there's the colour. Often you'll notice it's visibly streaked with greenish slime. Mould, perhaps, or some other unappetizing discoloration. You, along with the rest of the crew, pretend not to notice, a collective unspoken agreement to ignore the obvious signs of spoilage. This is served alongside mushy peas or beans the colour of wet ash, offering little nutritional value or appeal. You watch Cornelis, who had seen countless voyages, casually scrape the slime off his piece of pork, then shrug and eat it. It's not fit for human consumption, he mutters, a grim smile on his face. That's why they feed it to sailors. His callous comment isn't meant to be cruel, but rather to reflect the brutal acknowledged reality of your expendability, a truth you've begun to internalize. But perhaps the most ubiquitous and most reviled item in your diet is the hardtack biscuit. It is not only rock hard, so much so that you have to soak it in water, or worse, coffee, or weak brandy before consumption to avoid breaking your teeth, but it is perpetually crawling with weevils. These tiny beetles are everywhere, emerging from pinholes, scuttling across the surface, sometimes even surviving the soaking process. You learn the grim mantra, don't look, just eat, as you contend with the visual and textural repugnance of your staple food. This constant battle against infestation, against the very nature of your food, is a daily reminder of the dire conditions and the sheer will required to simply consume enough to survive. Every bite is a negotiation, every meal a test of your diminishing standards and increasing desperation, pushing you to consider even the most dangerous illicit means of survival. You've endured the recruitment cellar, the crushing debt, the stark hierarchy, and the truly appalling food and water. Your dreams of buying a farm have probably dwindled to a desperate hope of merely surviving. Yet even within the VOC's strictly controlled world, a different kind of economic current flows beneath the surface, a shadowy, illicit economy, known to all but officially acknowledged by none. Despite the VOC's iron grip and strict monopoly on all trade, private trade is an open secret, a crucial though dangerous economic activity for both officers and ordinary sailors. You quickly learn that where there is immense profit, there will always be those seeking to skim a little for themselves, a universal truth regardless of the century. You observe the officers, their movements more subtle, their dealings far grander. They operate on a larger, more organised scale, using their authority and access to smuggle significant quantities of valuable goods, perhaps a chest of fine silks or an entire barrel of rare spices back to Amsterdam. They have the means, the connections, and often the silent complicity of those higher up the chain. For them it's a way to multiply their already comfortable salaries to solidify their fortunes. For you, Jen, the stakes are both higher and far more personal. This risky endeavour represents often your only real chance for a substantial return on your years of suffering, a desperate attempt to reclaim some of the promise that lured you away from the farm. How do you, a common sailor deep in debt, even begin to participate in such a scheme? It's a painstaking process, demanding extreme frugality and absolute secrecy. You save your meagre wages guilder by denying yourself even the smallest comforts. An extra dram of brandy, a piece of fresh fruit in port, anything that costs money. Every coin you keep is a tiny act of rebellion against the system that seeks to extract every last bit of value from you. When the ship finally reaches the East Indies, perhaps at a small out-of-the-way trading post on a remote island, or during a carefully orchestrated shore leave in Batavia, you seize your opportunity. You seek out local traders, often in the dark corners of bustling markets, their eyes quick and wary. In hushed tones you negotiate carefully, purchasing small quantities of high-value spices, a pouch of nutmeg, a handful of cloves. These items are chosen for their concentrated value, their ability to be hidden easily, and their immense profitability back in Europe. You might pay a few stuvers for something that, if successfully smuggled, could fetch many times that back home. It's a calculation you perform in your head, the risk-reward ratio constantly swirling. The act of smuggling itself becomes a high-stakes game. Where do you hide a small fortune in nutmeg? You learn quickly how to become ingenious, hollowed-out wooden implements. False bottoms in old chests carefully sewn into the lining of your worn jacket, or even in the crevices of the ship's structure that only a common sailor would know. Every inspection by company officials, every random search of crew quarters sends a jolt of ice through your veins. You learn to project an air of disinterest to keep your face blank, even as your heart pounds a frantic rhythm against your ribs. The punishment for being caught is severe. Immediate confiscation, flogging, perhaps even being left behind in a foreign port, a fate worse than many deaths. It's a constant gamble against company inspectors, a silent battle of wits between the desperate and the powerful. Yet this illicit trade, this small, dangerous defiance, offers a flicker of hope. It's a fragile personal act of agency in a world designed to render you utterly powerless, the faint possibility of returning home with something more than just stories of hardship. However, as you immerse yourself in these human-made dangers, you're quickly reminded that the greatest, most impartial threat is not human greed or corporate control, but the unforgiving, relentless fury of the natural world itself. As you immerse yourself in the clandestine world of private trade, navigating the human-made dangers of company inspectors and the threat of severe punishment, you're quickly reminded that the greatest, most impartial threat is not human greed or corporate control. No, the truly unforgiving reality, the one that truly dictates your fate, is the relentless fury of the natural world itself. The sea doesn't care about your contract, your debt, or your dreams of a farm. It simply is. And its power, its indifference, is what ultimately defines the sheer scale of human loss on these voyages, a staggering and omnipresent reality that hangs heavy in the salt-laced air. You hear the chilling statistic long before you truly understand it. 1/3 of all Dutch VOC sailors, they say, never return home. It's a number that at first might seem abstract. But then as days turn into weeks and weeks into months, it becomes a palpable presence, a ghost that walks the decks. You watch men fall ill, watch them disappear overboard in a storm, watch them simply waste away from exhaustion and hunger. Each loss chips away at the collective, and you begin to count silently, grimly the shrinking numbers. Their bodies, you know, will either sink to the bottom of some foreign sea, swallowed by the crushing depths, without a trace or rot in unmarked graves on distant, unremembered shores. No headstones, no proper burials, just a brief splash, and a hurried prayer if you're lucky. It's an anonymity of death that underscores your expendability, a stark contrast to the grand heroic narratives you might have once imagined. You come to understand that disease, starvation and accidents claim far more lives than all naval battles combined, while the thought of a pirate attack or a skirmish with a rival fleet might fill you with a certain thrill, a grim sense of martial duty. Those are rare episodic events. The true enemy is far more insidious, far more patient. It's the slow, agonizing crawl of scurvy, the burning fever of typhus, the relentless grip of dysentery that wastes men away one watery stool at a time. It's a broken rope in a gale, a misstep on a slippery deck, a sudden lurch of the ship that sends a man plummeting into the churning water below, never to be seen again. This transforms what was once a romanticised adventure into a grim statistical lottery for survival. You didn't sign up to fight invisible enemies or to slowly starve. You signed up for glory, for fortune, for a new life. But here you are, merely trying to beat the odds, hoping your number isn't called. This grim reality is a constant heavy cloud over every sailor's existence, a pervasive undercurrent of fear and fatalism. You see it in the eyes of the older men, a quiet resignation that tells you they've made peace with the odds, or perhaps just stopped thinking about them. You feel it yourself, a dull ache of anxiety that never truly dissipates. Every creak of the timber, every sudden wave, every unfamiliar cough from a bunkmate sends a small tremor of unease through you. It's a world where you learn to be superstitious, to watch for omens, because logic and reason often offer no comfort. You live with the understanding that your life is not your own, not truly. It belongs in a way to the sea, to the company, and to the unpredictable whims of fate. And of all the enemies you face on this voyage, the most relentless, the most terrifying are the diseases that stalk the cramped decks below, patiently waiting for their next victim. Of all the enemies you face on this voyage, from the crushing debt to the capricious sea, none are quite as insidious, as patient, or as utterly terrifying as the common diseases that stalk the cramped decks below. They are a relentless, invisible enemy, striking without warning, transforming your ship from a vessel of grand enterprise into a floating infirmary, a grim charnel house. You might imagine grand battles against pirates or rival ships, but it is this silent, unseen foe that claims the most lives slowly, painfully often, without a chance to fight back. And at the top of this grim list is scurvy, the dreaded sailor's curse. You've heard the whispers, seen the wary glances whenever fresh provisions begin to dwindle. But to witness it firsthand is to understand a horror beyond imagining. You see the first signs, a general lethargy, a loss of appetite. Then the true gruesome manifestation begins. Faces swell, turning puffy and grotesque, almost unrecognisable. Your shipmate Adrian, a quiet man who kept mostly to himself, shows you his gums one morning. They're not merely inflamed, they're freely bleeding, a dark, viscous ooze that stains his teeth and the corners of his mouth. It looks like he's been chewing on rotten meat, but no, it's his own body betraying him. Then come the dark bruises appearing spontaneously on his skin like plague spots, turning his limbs mottled and tender to the touch. Each jolt of the ship, each minor bump seems to leave another horrifying mark. The most shocking and perhaps the most viscerally unsettling reality is the loss of teeth. You watch horrified as Adrian's teeth, once firm and strong, begin to loosen, wiggling in their sockets, before eventually agonizingly falling out one by one. He tries to eat the hardtack, but it's impossible, his mouth a bloody gaping wound, His breath grows foul, the stench of decay clinging to him. He groans in pain, delirious with fever, until one quiet night he simply ceases to breathe. His death is not swift or heroic. It is a slow, agonizing decline, a testament to the brutal toll of the sea and the company's inadequate provisions. You observe the ritual of his burial, the body swiftly sewn into canvas, weighted and slipped into the inky blackness. But the image of his swollen face, his bleeding gums, his missing teeth remains etched in your mind, a constant chilling reminder of what could await you. Beyond scurvy, a host of other invisible enemies sweep through the crew quarters. Dysentery, with its debilitating grip, turns men into mere shadows of their former selves, constantly running to the heads, or worse, succumbing to their bodily functions where they lay. Typhus spread by lice brings burning fevers and terrifying delirium, turning strong men into raving madmen. Malaria in tropical waters strikes with chills and shakes that rack the body, leaving you weak and gasping. Rampant fevers, their origins mysterious, debilitate men rapidly, their eyes glaze, their skin burning to the touch. These outbreaks transform the already cramped, unsanitary crew quarters into a floating infirmary. The rudimentary sick bay, often little more than a small stuffy room with a few straw pallets, is quickly overwhelmed. Healthy men you included are forced to sleep amidst the sick and dying, inhaling the heavy fetid air, the groans of pain, the smell of vomit and bodily waste. There's no escaping it. You live in a constant state of low-grade fear, always checking yourself for telltale signs, always wondering if the next cough, the next ache will be the beginning of your own agonizing descent into oblivion. And as if these internal threats weren't enough, you also face the immense external challenges that the very environment throws at your ship, a terrifying gauntlet across the globe. As if the invisible enemies of disease weren't enough, you also face the immense external challenges that the very environment throws at your ship, a terrifying gauntlet across the globe. The journey itself is a constant battle against the elements, a relentless series of climatic shifts that test the ship's timbers and your own endurance to their breaking point. You quickly learn that the ocean in its vast indifference is perhaps the most formidable adversary of all. Your journey begins, of course, in the familiar yet formidable waters of the North Sea. It's not the gentle canals of Holland nor the placid rivers of your youth. Here the North Sea greets ships with choppy waves that immediately induce violent seasickness in new recruits, yourself included. Imagine the relentless pitching and rolling, the constant lurch of the deck beneath your feet, turning your stomach into a knot of misery. You cling to railings trying to find your sea legs, but the world seems determined to spin and heave. The smell of fresh vomit mixed with the brine and tar becomes an early unpleasant constant. You learn quickly to direct your sickness over the side if you can make it, or face the grim task of cleaning up your own mess. This initial challenge, while agonizing, is merely a prelude, a gentle introduction to the true power of the sea. Further south, as you cross the equator, you enter a zone of entirely different yet equally torturous conditions, the doldrums. Here the winds die, leaving your majestic East Indiaman becalmed under a sky of merciless intensity of heat. The sun beats down with an almost physical force, turning the deck into a scorching griddle. The air hangs heavy, stagnant, without even a whisper of a breeze to offer relief. Progress becomes agonizingly slow sometimes, just a few miles a day or worse, none at all, leaving the sails hanging limply like discarded laundry. You sit or stand or try to sleep, feeling your clothes cling to your skin, permanently damp with sweat. Below decks, conditions exacerbate to an unbearable oven. The air is thick, stifling, laden with the stench of unwashed bodies, stale food, and the reek of the bilges. You gasp for breath, feeling the heat press in on you from all sides, wishing for even the slightest gust of wind, a whisper of a cloud, anything to break the suffocating stillness. This isn't a violent challenge, but a slow psychological torture, a test of patience and resilience as water dwindles and hope begins to fray. But the true terror, the one whispered about with grim reverence by the veterans, awaits you farther south at the notorious Roaring Forties. Here in the latitudes between 40 and 50 degrees south, the winds howl with an almost sentient fury unimpeded by land masses. They unleash colossal waves the size of houses, monstrous walls of water that rise from the depth, threatening to engulf your ship whole. Your vessel, which once felt so enormous and secure, is tossed like a child's toy, a mere splinter of wood at the mercy of the elements. The deck becomes a treacherous, constantly shifting landscape made even more perilous by the sheets of icy spray that sweep across it. Working on deck in these conditions is a constant gamble, with your life a terrifying dance with the possibility of being swept overboard into the churning, freezing abyss. You cling to ropes, to stanchions, to anything, your muscles screaming with effort, your eyes wide with a mixture of terror and grim determination. Every man knows the legend of a rogue wave, a sudden gust, a moment of inattention that sends a sailor to his watery grave. This gauntlet of environmental challenges, from the nausea of the North Sea to the suffocating heat of the doldrums and the terrifying power of the forties, reminds you that for all the human machinations, for all the company's power, you're ultimately insignificant in the face of nature's raw, untamed might. And even beyond these dramatic, life-threatening storms, the persistent, harsh conditions define the very fabric of your daily existence, slowly grinding away at your body and spirit. Beyond the dramatic, life-threatening storms and the agonizing calms, the persistent, harsh conditions define the very fabric of your daily existence, slowly grinding away at your body and spirit. You learn that the ocean's fury isn't just in its monumental waves or its suffocating stillness. It's also in the relentless, insidious details that permeate every waking moment. These aren't the things that make for gripping tales in taverns back home, but they are the quiet, soul-wearing realities that wear a man down day after endless day. Take, for instance, the intense tropical heat and humidity that becomes your constant companion in equatorial waters. You might have imagined sun-drenched beaches, but aboard the ship is a different kind of heat. A heavy, suffocating blanket that never lifts. Your coarse linen shirt, already stiff with salt and sweat, never truly dries. It clings to your skin, a perpetual clammy embrace, feeling almost like a second unwanted skin. Even your meagre bedding, a rough blanket, if you're lucky enough to have one, feels perpetually cool and damp, a breeding ground for mildew-making rest, a constant negotiation with clamminess. You'd think the sun would bake everything dry, but no, the air itself seems to hold a moisture that simply refuses to let go. You learn that the jungle doesn't just grow on land. It seems to be establishing roots within the ship itself, slowly, silently, a constant battle against the damp that permeates every timber. That infamous hardtack biscuit, which you've already learned to despise for its rock hardness and weevil inhabitants, now presents a new challenge. In this unrelenting humidity, it quickly grows fuzzy with mould, patches of green and black blooming across its surface. The weevils are one thing, an accepted if repulsive form of extra protein, but now you contend with a furry growth, a persistent reminder of decay that makes each forced bite even more unpalatable. You try to scrape it off, but the taste, a bitter, earthy tang of rot, often permeates the entire biscuit. It's just another layer of disgust to overcome at every meal. The very ship around you seems to respond to the environment. The tar sealing the gaps between the wooden planks of the deck softens and bubbles under the relentless tropical sun. You can smell its pungent, almost sweet aroma rising, a heavy, oily scent that mixes with the general miasma of the ship. Sometimes, if you walk barefoot, you feel its sticky warmth underfoot adhering to your soles with each step, and the metal fittings, the iron rings, the cannon parts, the hinges, become too hot to touch with bare hands. Imagine grabbing a handrail for support only to recoil from the searing heat, a tiny annoying burn that adds to the daily tally of discomfort. These aren't dramatic, life-threatening events like a rogue wave, but a constant grinding misery. Each small discomfort accumulates, wearing down your resolve, fraying your nerves. It's like living in a constant, inescapable warm bath, but one that's a bit too dirty and never quite draining. These seemingly minor details contribute significantly to the daily grinding misery and constant threat to health. The perpetual dampness, the mouldy food, the sticky heat, all combine to create a perfect breeding ground for infections. A simple, cut a scrape against a rough rope, which might heal easily on land, festers quickly in this environment, turning into a painful, debilitating wound that can lead to fever, blood poisoning, or worse if not treated. You long for the crisp, dry air of home, the feeling of truly clean clothes, of a truly dry bed. The tropical heat and humidity permeate not just the ship, but your very spirit, making rest elusive and comfort a forgotten memory. And as if this constant war against damp heat and decay wasn't enough, these conditions are also a perfect invitation for an army of creatures making your life even more lively, shall we say. You've heard about the weevils in the hardtack, but that's just the beginning of your acquaintance with the ship's other residents. As if the damp, the heat and the mould weren't enough, these conditions also serve as a perfect invitation for an unwelcome army of creatures making your life even more lively, shall we say. You've already made the acquaintance of the weevils in your hardtack, those tiny, tireless denizens of your daily bread. They are by now such a constant companion that you barely register their presence, grimly accepting them as an unfortunate yet inevitable source of extra protein. A dark joke whispered among the crew as you scrape them from your biscuit. You're past the point of being disgusted. Now it's just a fact of shipboard life, another layer of grit in an already gritty existence. But the weevils are merely the foot soldiers in the pervasive torment of pest infestations. Far more unsettling are the rats. Oh, the rats! They are the true landlords of the lower deck, scurrying freely over and around everything, a constant rustling presence in the perpetual gloom. You hear them at night, a frantic scratching and squeaking from behind the bulkheads, a rhythmic patter of tiny claws overhead. They are bold, unafraid of human presence, almost as if they know they belong here more than you do. You might wake in the middle of a fitful sleep, feeling a sudden light weight on your chest, a brush of whiskers against your neck. You freeze your heart hammering before slowly, cautiously you reach up to swat at the offending creature. Sometimes they even gnaw at your clothes or the leather straps of your meagre possessions, leaving ragged holes and an even greater sense of violation. Imagine trying to find peace, trying to drift into sleep when you know these disease-carrying rodents are sharing your cramped space, running over your body, perhaps even nibbling at your toes in the darkness. It adds a profound layer of revulsion and discomfort, making true rest almost impossible, constantly reminding you that you are living in a shared, unsanitary ecosystem, and you are not at the top of the food chain. Then, as you sail into tropical waters, you face a new relentless torment, swarms of biting insects. Mosquitoes, flies, tiny gnats. They materialize seemingly from nowhere, drawn by the damp heat and the scent of human bodies. They are everywhere, buzzing around the dim lanterns, dive-bombing your meagre meals, settling on your skin with an infuriating tenacity. You swat at them, curse them, but they are legion. They infest the food stores, buzzing around the mouldy hardtack and the barrels of salt meat, depositing their filth wherever they land. They contaminate the precious, already foul water barrels, leaving tiny carcasses floating on the surface. And worst of all, they swarm over your bedding, finding every exposed patch of skin, leaving behind itchy welts that quickly turn into inflamed, painful bumps. In the damp, hot climate, with no fresh water for washing, and little in the way of proper medical care, these itchy welts easily become infected. A small bite can quickly turn into a weeping sore, a gateway for fever and further illness. You scratch, you itch. Try to ignore them, but the constant irritation gnaws at your nerves, making sleep a desperate, broken affair. There's no escaping them, nowhere to hide. They're a constant buzzing reminder of your vulnerability, of the pervasive filth, and of the unyielding harshness of your new life. This macro-level framework of pervasive danger, ruthless economic drivers, and a rigid social hierarchy has profoundly shaped your daily lived experience from the moment you left your farm. You've been reduced to a basic struggle, a constant battle against the elements and creatures, a far cry from the simple yet stable life you once knew. Now your mind often drifts back to those simpler times, to the comforting certainties of solid ground, as you brace for another day within the ship's claustrophobic confines. You've endured the relentless discomforts, the pervasive stench, and the constant threat of illness and vermin. Your mind, though weary, finds itself drifting back, seeking refuge in the quiet corners of memory. You yearn for the familiar smells of home, for a clean bed, for the quiet comfort of your small village, a memory that now feels like a distant, unattainable paradise. And indeed, your initial home, a small farming village nestled north of Rotterdam, was precisely that, a haven of rudimentary but stable shelter. It was a simple farmhouse, perhaps, with a single small window that framed a view of verdant fields, not an endless expanse of grey sea. Inside, the luxury of a straw mattress, though humble by modern standards, provided a baseline of simple comfort. You might not have thought much of it at the time, but that sense of predictable stability of a roof that didn't pitch and roll of a bed that didn't harbour rats was a peace you now ache for. The memory of home, with its familiar smells of damp straw mixed with hearth ash, becomes a potent, almost painful contrast to the horrors you now endure. You recall the comforting scent of wood smoke mingling with the earthy tang of your family's hearth, perhaps the faint sweet smell of fresh-baked bread on a good day. There was a relative peace, a quiet rhythm to life dictated by the seasons and the demands of the land, not the merciless clang of a ship's bell or the howl of a gale. This stillness, this sense of grounded existence, now feels like a fragment from another life, a poignant counterpoint to the relentless chaos of the sea. You remember the feeling of solid earth beneath your feet, the reassuring weight of the soil as you ploughed the unchanging horizon of your fields. The shift from that agrarian stillness to the constant disorienting motion of the sea was a profound shock to your body, a visceral betrayal of everything you once knew. For weeks your inner ear fought against the perpetual sway, the relentless pitching and rolling that turned even the simplest task into a balancing act. Every muscle in your body accustomed to the steady pull of the plough or the firm grip on a milking pail now strained to maintain equilibrium. You'd wake from a fitful sleep still feeling the phantom lurch of the deck, your stomach clenching, even on the rare calm days. Your mind, too, struggled to adapt, perpetually on alert for the next unexpected shift, the next groan of the timbers. It was an assault on your senses, a complete recalibration of your physical existence, stripping away the comforting certainty of gravity you had taken for granted your entire life. You might even find yourself in a moment of quiet despair, yearning for the familiar stable smell of manure from your father's fields. At least that was a smell of life, of growth, of a predictable if hard existence. It was a smell that belonged to the solid ground, not the oscillating, suffocating dampness of a ship's hold. You'd prefer the predictable muck of the farm to the unpredictable filth of the ocean any day. That farmhouse with its single window was a world of certainty. The world you now inhabit, however, is anything but certain, and your true induction into its grim realities didn't even begin on the ship itself. It started in a place that served as a grim, suffocating transition, a holding pen for desperation, a chilling premonition of what awaited you. You had left the relative peace of your farm, chasing dreams of fortune and escape. But your true induction into the grim realities of this new life didn't even begin on the ship itself. It started in a place that served as a grim, suffocating transition, a holding pen for desperation, the VOC recruit cellar in Amsterdam. You knew it the moment you stepped inside the oppressive air, a chilling premonition of what awaited you. Imagine, if you will, descending into a cavern, not a natural cave, but a man-made one carved out beneath the bustling, indifferent streets of a great city. This was your grim induction, Your first real taste of what it meant to be just another body in the VOC's vast machinery. The cellar was dimly lit perhaps by a single sputtering lamp, its feeble glow doing little to dispel the oppressive gloom. It was a foul-smelling cavern packed with men. Dozens, perhaps scores, all like you, desperate, hopeful, often drunk and utterly unaware of the true cost of their ambition. The air hung heavy thick with a miasma that seemed to cling to your very clothes, a pungent blend of unwashed bodies, stale beer, and something worse beneath it all. You could almost taste the desperation in the air, a metallic tang that mixed with the smells of human neglect and cheap intoxicants. This wasn't merely unpleasant. It was a sensory assault, a visceral shock that immediately set the tone for the journey ahead. Here in this subterranean purgatory, comfort was an alien concept. There were no proper beds, no soft mattresses like the straw one you'd left behind. Instead you found thin pallets in the corner, simple rough boards laid directly on the hard damp floor, perhaps covered with a threadbare blanket if you were lucky. This offered little rest, merely a temporary place to collapse to escape the constant press of bodies and the din of drunken chatter. It was a holding pen, nothing more designed for utility and containment, not for human well-being. The smell hits you the moment you stepped inside an immediate inescapable assault on your senses, announcing your arrival in a world utterly devoid of dignity. You inhaled deeply and immediately regretted it, the stench filling your lungs and clinging to your throat. This sensory shock was an early disquieting premonition, a vivid foreshadowing of the even more confined and putrid conditions that awaited you aboard the ship. The cellar was merely a taster training ground for your senses, preparing them for the greater assault to come. You learned to ignore the man coughing, racking next to you, the constant shuffling of bodies, the quiet desperation etched on every face. You learned to tune out the sounds, to numb your senses, to simply exist in this liminal space, this brief interlude between your old life and your terrifying new one. Your time in the recruit cellar was not just a waiting period. It was a psychological and physical conditioning, stripping away any last vestiges of comfort or expectation. You were being prepared not for adventure, but for endurance. Soon enough you would leave the dubious comforts of the cellar for the very real, very horrifying reality of the crew quarters aboard the Batavia's Pride. You often wonder which was worse, the stagnant, oppressive air of the cellar, or the constant, disorienting motion and even more pervasive stench of your new wooden prison. You've left the dubious comforts of the recruit cellar, believing perhaps that anything above ground, anything closer to the open sky would be an improvement. But as you are directed below deck down a narrow creaking ladder into the belly of the Batavia's Pride, a horrifying reality settles upon you. The crew quarters, your new home for the foreseeable future, are not an improvement. They are a descent into an even more profound level of filth and confinement, a tangible manifestation of your diminished status. It's a dark, cramped area, located just one level above the cargo hold, a space where the ship's timbers groan under the weight of the sea and the bulk of its precious cargo. Here the last vestiges of personal space, of comfort, of anything resembling dignity are stripped away. You find yourself among dozens of men sleeping shoulder to shoulder on the hard deck. There are no individual bunks, no hammocks for common sailors like you. Your bed is simply a patch of hard, unforgiving timber shared with the dampness, the grime, and the shifting bodies of your shipmates. Imagine the constant jostling, the involuntary touches, the impossibility of finding a comfortable position. Each movement of the ship, each slight shift in the collective mass of sleeping men disturbs your fitful sleep. You curl into yourself, trying to create some invisible boundary, some personal space that simply doesn't exist. This communal sleeping arrangement eliminates any concept of privacy, turning rest into a constant low-grade struggle against discomfort and the intrusive presence of others. You might even envy the rats, at least they can find their own dark corners. Above you the ceiling is so incredibly low that you can barely stand upright. You learn to move with a perpetual stoop, your back aching from the constant curve of your head, instinctively ducking to avoid striking the rough beams overhead. For a farm boy used to the wide open skies and the freedom of movement in the fields, this relentless physical confinement is a torment. It's as if the ship itself is trying to compress you, to literally make you smaller, to fit into the cramped utilitarian space allotted to you. You learn to breathe shallower, your back permanently stooped. Your body conforms to the ship's architecture, a living part of its functional design. This physical confinement, amplified by the ship's constant living sounds, the creaking timbers, the groaning of wood against wood, the rhythmic slap and rush of water against the hull, creates a profound sense of being perpetually trapped within a wooden cage. The ship becomes a living, breathing entity, but one that actively works against your comfort, against your very sense of self. Each creak becomes a protest, each groan a lament as the vessel battles the sea and you inside battle the confines of your existence. You're literally living inside a wooden box, a prison designed for efficiency and profit, not for human well-being. The constant motion, even on calm seas, prevents any true sense of stability, any escape from the relentless sway that keeps your inner ear in a perpetual state of disarray. This is not just a place to sleep. It is a profound assault on your physical and psychological state, an environment designed to strip away everything you once took for granted about comfort and space. And as if the cramped, dark and hard conditions weren't enough, you'll soon discover that the very air you breathe down here is a nightmare, all its own, a miasma that clings to everything and never ever dissipates. You've now spent enough time in the crew quarters to understand that the physical confinement, the hard deck and the constant motion are only part of the torment. Perhaps even more insidious is the air itself. Below decks, in that cramped, low-ceilinged space you now call home, the air is perpetually thick with a miasma that never dissipates. It's not just a bad smell, it's a living entity, a suffocating blend that clings to everything, including your very skin. Even before the ship has fully cast off from the docks of Amsterdam, before the salt spray has truly begun to mingle with the grime, you're enveloped in this heavy, cloying atmosphere. Imagine a combination of scents that would on land send you fleeing. Here it is, your constant companion, the pungent odour of unwashed bodies, the stale, sour tang of stale beer, spilled and absorbed into every timber, the sharp, almost industrial scent of tar from the ship's construction and maintenance, and beneath it all the unmistakable, ever-present tang of urine. You'd think perhaps that a ship being exposed to the vastness of the sea would at least have fresh air. You'd be wrong. The lack of proper ventilation, especially in the lower decks where you are housed, means this potent cocktail of odours simply recirculates, growing stronger with each passing hour, each additional body. It settles into your clothes, your hair even seems to seep into your very pores. As the voyage truly begins and the ship encounters its first choppy waves in the North Sea, this pervasive stench intensifies. The new recruits, yourself included, succumb to violent seasickness. Imagine the raw acidic smell of fresh vomit, adding another even more visceral layer to the already overwhelming miasma. It pools on the deck, mixes with the general filth, and in the absence of any real cleaning or fresh air, simply becomes another component of the suffocating blend. You try to avoid it, to step around it, but in the close quarters it's almost impossible not to encounter it, not to inhale its foulness. A veteran sailor, perhaps Martin, a gruff but surprisingly pragmatic man, notices your grimace, your desperate attempts to breathe through your nose only to be assaulted by the putrid air. He offers grim advice delivered with a cynical smile. Breathe through your mouth, lad. You'll get used to it. And then the ultimate hollow promise. After a few months you won't even notice it anymore. You cling to the hope that this might be true, that your senses will mercifully dull, that this suffocating blanket of stench will become merely background noise. But in the moment, the words offer no comfort. they only highlight the extreme level of adaptation required to merely exist in such an environment. It's not about ignoring it. It's about suppressing your body's natural revulsion, about forcing yourself to accept the utterly unacceptable. You realise that to survive you must not only endure the physical hardships, but also deaden a part of yourself, dull your perceptions, and learn to live in a state of perpetual sensory assault. This erasure of basic human comfort, this constant degradation, extends even to the most private and fundamental acts of your daily life. You've learned to tolerate the constant reek of the crew quarters, to breathe through your mouth, as Martin advised. But this erasure of basic human comfort, this constant degradation, extends even to the most private and fundamental acts of your daily life. You, a man from a quiet farm, are now forced to confront a reality where privacy is a non-existent luxury, where every bodily function is performed with an audience, or at least within earshot. It's another subtle yet profound way the ship chips away at your sense of self, reducing you to a mere functional unit in a collective struggle for survival. The designated facilities for answering nature's call are known as the heads. Imagine them not the small enclosed privy you might have had at home, but crude holes, often just planks with openings suspended over the bow of the ship. You make your way forward, enduring the biting wind or the scorching sun, and find yourself exposed not just to the elements, but to the eyes of anyone on the foredeck. You perform your most intimate functions in full view, or at least within clear sight of passing shipmates' officers making their rounds, or even if the waves are particularly high, curious seabirds. It's an exercise in extreme self-consciousness, a constant battle against the ingrained modesty that you grew up with. You learn to turn your back to avoid eye contact, to focus on the task at hand, trying to make yourself invisible in a space where invisibility is impossible. The rushing sound of the sea below is your only companion, carrying away not just the waste, but perhaps a little piece of your dignity with each splash. During storms, or even just in rough seas, these exposed heads become utterly unusable. The waves crash over the bow, swamping the area, making it impossible and dangerous to access. So when the ship is pitching and rolling violently, when the winds howl and the spray lashes the deck, men are forced to seek alternatives. And where do you go for relief when the very elements conspire against you? You go to the closest available option buckets right there within the cramped, already foul-smelling confines of the crew quarters. Imagine this scenario: the ship is lurching, groaning a symphony of wood and water, and you or a shipmate must relieve yourselves in a bucket just feet away from where others are trying to sleep or eat or mend a torn shirt. The already overwhelming stench of unwashed bodies, stale beer tar and urine is instantly intensified by the fresh assault. There's nowhere to escape the smell, nowhere to hide from the sound. This practice not only adds to the general pervasive filth, but also creates a dangerously unsanitary environment for all. Disease, already a constant threat, now has an even easier pathway to spread through the closely packed, weakened crew. The lack of basic sanitation, the inability to maintain any semblance of cleanliness, accelerates the downward spiral of health and morale. You become accustomed to the grim reality, the silent collective understanding that this is simply how things are. Your sense of self, your personal boundaries are chipped away day by day, replaced by a raw functional existence, where the most basic needs are met in the most undignified ways. You are no longer just Jan the farm boy. You are a sailor, a unit in a harsh world, and your body, like your labour, is simply another tool to be managed, no matter how unpleasantly. And even as you navigate these deeply uncomfortable social norms, you realise you're never truly alone, especially not in the dark. And even as you navigate these deeply uncomfortable social norms, you realise you're never truly alone, especially not in the dark. There are always other less human residents sharing your quarters, adding another layer of revulsion to your already strained existence. You've met the weevils in your hardtack. Now allow yourself to truly get acquainted with the ship's true rulers of the shadows, the rats. Rats were an ever-present, revolting aspect of shipboard life. They weren't just occasional pests scurrying away at the sight of a boot. They were bold, almost audacious, as if they knew they had more claim to this wooden world than you did. Imagine trying to find a moment of peace, trying to drift into a truly restful sleep after a grueling watch. The darkness below decks is absolute, broken only by the dim flickering glow of a single lantern if you're lucky, or the occasional sliver of moonlight filtering down. In this oppressive gloom you hear the constant rustling sounds, the scratch of tiny claws on timber, the quick, furtive movements that seem to come from every direction at once. They are everywhere, scurrying constantly over and around sleeping men weaving through the bundles of meagre possessions, their presence a palpable, unsettling hum in the night. The true horror, however, isn't just their omnipresence, but their chilling boldness. You might wake with a sudden jolt, a feeling of light pressure on your chest. Your heart pounds a frantic rhythm against your ribs as you realize a rat. It sits there, sometimes perched brazenly on a man's chest, its whiskers twitching, its beady eyes perhaps reflecting a glint of the distant lantern light. It might be nibbling at a loose thread on your rough shirt, or perhaps simply observing you, its tiny movements sending shivers down your spine. Imagine the profound sense of violation, the revulsion that crawls over your skin as you realize this vermin is using your body as a perch. You reach up, swatting frantically, sending the creature scurrying back into the darkness, leaving behind only the ghost of its weight and the lingering sense of unease. This nightly struggle against these unwelcome, unsanitary companions turns fitful sleep into a constant battle. You try to pull your blanket tighter, to tuck your hands in to make yourself a less inviting target, but they always find a way. Their presence isn't just an annoyance, it's a profound psychological torment. These aren't just farm rats easily driven off with a pitchfork. These are sea rats, resilient, intelligent, and utterly fearless. They are disease vectors, their fur-carrying fleas, and their dropping, spreading sickness, adding another layer of silent, invisible threat to your already precarious health. On the farm, rats were pests, but you had space, you had light, you had the means to control them. Here in the suffocating confines of the ship, they are simply another master of your environment, another reminder of your diminished state. Their gnawing, their scurrying, their audacious presence serves to deepen the misery, making true rest an almost impossible luxury. You learn to live with them, to mentally block them out, but a part of you is always vigilant, always aware of their presence. The raw, unpleasant truth of these living conditions, from the stench to the vermin, makes the simple, clean memories of your past life shine even brighter. You find your mind wandering back not to the grand fields, but to the most basic, comforting experiences, the taste of a real meal, the kind that didn't crawl away from you. You've learned to endure the cramped, foul-smelling crew quarters, the lack of privacy, and the audacious rats that claim the lower decks as their own. But as your mind seeks refuge from these grim realities, it often wanders back to the most basic, comforting experiences of your past life. You find yourself recalling almost painfully the taste of a real meal, the kind that didn't crawl away from you, the kind that was prepared with care and eaten in peace. Your memories of farm life, though perhaps romanticized by the sheer hardship of the present, included simple but hearty meals of dark bread and cheese. It was a taste of fresh, wholesome sustenance, a quiet luxury you once took for granted. That dark, dense bread, often still warm from the oven, with its earthy, satisfying chew, paired with a firm, tangy cheese made from your own farm's milk. These were meals that grounded you, that fueled your body for the demanding farm labour, leaving you feeling satisfied and nourished. The memory of their fresh, uncomplicated flavours, of the simple pleasure of a meal eaten without fear of weevils or green slime, quickly became a stark, longed-for contrast to your shipboard diet. This foundational memory underscored the profound decline in the quality and palatability of your food once you embarked on your voyage, making the farm's simple fare seem like a paradise. now a lost Eden of taste and nourishment. You'd give anything for a single crust of that bread, a sliver of that cheese, just to remind your palate of what real food tasted like. Your initial indoctrination into VOC ship's fare began not on the ocean but in the Amsterdam cellar, a grim prelude to the greater deprivations. Even there, the watery porridge and stale bread were deemed barely edible by your already low standards. But this was a deliberate conditioning, a calculated psychological and physical preparation designed to lower expectations. It was aimed at dulling your senses, at making the subsequent descent into even worse conditions seem less shocking, less of a profound betrayal. The company, in its efficient cruelty, was preparing your body and mind for the starvation-level rations and spoiled food that awaited you at sea. You were being taught implicitly to accept the unacceptable, to survive on the absolute minimum, to silence the protests of your stomach and your taste buds. This was the opening act of a culinary tragedy, and you, the unwitting protagonist, were already being trained for your role. You recall those first few days on board, clutching your ration of hardtack, still trying to reconcile the recruiter's promises with the reality of the slop in your bowl. The memory of home-cooked meals, however simple, became a poignant anchor to a world that was rapidly fading from reach. You learn to hoard, to guard your meagre portion, to eat quickly before others can eye your plate with hungry desperation. The act of eating becomes less about enjoyment and more about the primal drive to simply stay alive. The flavours, the textures, the very concept of a satisfying meal began to blur, replaced by a constant low-grade hunger and a profound sense of loss for the simple comforts of home. And as the voyage truly began, the ship's diet became a monotonous, progressively worsening ordeal, making even the cellar slop a distant, almost pleasant memory. Once at sea, the ship's diet became a monotonous, progressively worsening ordeal, making even the barely edible slop of the Amsterdam cellar seem like a forgotten feast. You quickly grasp that variety is a luxury not afforded to common sailors, and quality is an ever-diminishing curve. Each day blends into the next, marked by the same unappetizing meals served with grim regularity, a constant assault on your palate and your will. It's not just the taste, it's the texture, the smell, the knowledge of its dubious origins that truly test your resolve. You learn to eat quickly, almost mechanically, disconnecting your mind from the act of consumption, simply performing the necessary function to keep your body moving. Breakfast that supposed start to a new day quickly devolved into a grey slop of porridge. Not the warm, comforting, slightly sweet gruel you might imagine, but a thin, watery concoction, often congealed and lukewarm. You prod it with your spoon, stirring it around, and inevitably you find them unidentifiable lumps floating within. They are dark, irregular shapes, sometimes soft and gelatinous, other times firm enough to crunch between your teeth. You try to rationalise, to tell yourself it's just poorly cooked grain, or perhaps a stray piece of old wood from the barrel. But a part of your mind, the part that still remembers fresh food, whispers of far more repulsive possibilities. A veteran sailor, Cornelis, watching your hesitant spoon, offers a grim piece of advice, his voice low and laced with a cynical humour. Don't look too closely, lad. The less you know, the easier it is to swallow. He says it without malice, a simple statement of fact born of years of forced adaptation. You not understanding that this isn't a challenge to your bravery, but a lesson in necessary self-deception. The very act of eating becomes a challenge to both palate and stomach. Each bite is a conscious effort, a test of your mental fortitude against your body's protests. You chew slowly, or try to swallow quickly anything to minimize the taste, to avoid dwelling on the texture, to push down the rising nausea. You've heard of men whose stomachs simply refuse, who waste away not from lack of food, but from an inability to keep it down. You fight against that fate, forcing yourself to consume every meagre portion, knowing that hunger is a far more immediate and painful threat than the unknown contents of your porridge. This daily ritual, repeated every morning, chips away at your spirit, replacing any joy of nourishment with a relentless sense of endurance. You yearn for something fresh, Something clean, something that doesn't require a mental battle to consume. The conversation around the mess table isn't about the flavour of the food, it's about its basic edibility, about trying to guess what exactly those lumps might be, or whether a particular batch is more or less rancid than the last. It's a grim form of bonding, this shared misery over mealtimes. You learn to recognise the subtle signs of true spoilage, the moments when even the most hardened sailor hesitates. And you learn too the desperation that allows you to overcome that hesitation, pushing past disgust for the sake of another day's strength. This wasn't just food, it was a daily reminder of your place in the VOC hierarchy, a testament to how cheaply your well-being was valued. And as the day progresses, the dinner meal that follows offers little in the way of reprieve, plunging you deeper into the monotonous, unappetizing reality of shipboard sustenance. As the day progressed, the dinner meal that followed offered little in the way of reprieve, plunging you deeper into the monotonous, unappetizing reality of shipboard sustenance. If breakfast was an assault, dinner at noon was a siege. Typically it consisted of salt beef or pork, so briny it made your lips crack. You'd think after weeks or months at sea your palate might adjust, might even welcome the familiar if harsh taste. But no. The sheer concentration of salt used as the primary preservation method left your mouth a parched desert, demanding an immediate, almost desperate gulp of your foul water ration. Your tongue felt like sandpaper. Your lips stiffened and peeled, a constant, painful reminder of the meal long after it was reluctantly swallowed. It was as if the company was extracting moisture from you even as it tried to provide sustenance. The meat itself, often a slab of indistinguishable cured flesh, was impossibly tough. Imagine trying to cut through a piece of leather with a butter knife. That's the kind of effort required. You struggling to saw through a piece of salt pork with your dull shipboard knife, feel your hand cramping your arm muscles, aching with the effort. It's less a culinary experience and more a physical endurance test. And then there's the visual. Often you'd notice it was visibly streaked with greenish slime. A thin glistening film, sometimes vibrant, sometimes dull, clinging to the surface of the meat. It could be mould or some other unappetizing byproduct of long-term storage in damp conditions. You, along with the rest of the crew, quickly developed a silent collective agreement everyone pretended not to notice. You'd scrape it off discreetly or simply turn the piece over, hoping for a cleaner side before forcing yourself to chew. To acknowledge it, to vocalize your disgust, would be to break a tacit rule, to risk losing your appetite entirely in a situation where every calorie counted. This unappetizing protein was served alongside mushy peas or beans the colour of wet ash. Imagine a plate of grey-green sludge devoid of any vibrant colour or inviting texture. They were often overcooked, stored for too long, and utterly lacking in any fresh flavour or nutritional appeal. These were not the vibrant sweet peas from your farm, picked fresh from the vine. These were resurrected fragments of dried legumes rehydrated into a bland, pulpy mass. They offered bulk, perhaps a meagre filling for your perpetually empty stomach, but little in the way of true sustenance or pleasure. The peas, the beans, the meat all contributed to a diet that was designed for mere survival, not health or enjoyment. You began to understand that the company's idea of a balanced diet was anything that kept you alive long enough to perform your duties. Watching you struggle with your rations, perhaps, with a slight grimace on your face, Cornelis, the old hand, offers another of his darkly humorous observations. "It's not fit for human consumption," he mutters, his voice low, a dry, almost bitter laugh escaping his lips. "That's why they feed it to sailors." His callous comment isn't meant as a personal insult, but rather as a brutal reflection of their shared reality, a truth you've internalized. This daily assault on your senses and your dignity solidified the understanding that your well-being was secondary to profit. You begin to yearn for any form of comfort, any escape from this relentless monotony of inedible meals. You find yourself, like every other sailor, turning to the last most ubiquitous companion of your shipboard diet, the hardtack where an even more intimate relationship with its inhabitants awaits. You've battled the briny beef and the mushy peas, forcing down what your body protests against. Yet there remains one constant, one ever-present companion in your shipboard diet, a staple so ubiquitous it defines your sustenance, the hardtack biscuit. It's an item you quickly develop a love-hate relationship with, mostly hate, but one you cannot dare not live without. This isn't the light, airy cracker you might know. This is an engineering marvel of indestructibility. It's not only rock hard, capable of surviving storms and perhaps even small cannon fire, but it's perpetually crawling with weevils. Imagine a biscuit so tough it could double as building material, and then picture it teeming with tiny brown unwelcome inhabitants. The sheer hardness of the hardtack is legendary. You quickly learn that attempting to bite into it directly is a fool's errand, a quick path to broken teeth and shattered illusions of dental health. Your dentist, if you had one in this century, would weep at the sight of your molars after a few months on this diet. Instead, you learn the sailor's trick: you must soak it. Sometimes in your meagre water ration, sometimes in the equally meagre coffee, and if you're truly desperate or feeling adventurous, in a splash of watered-down brandy. You leave it to soften, transforming the unyielding block into something merely dense and chewy. This ritual, however, doesn't always solve the other more persistent problem. Those weevils, they're everywhere. Tiny dark specks that emerge from pinholes in the biscuit, scuttling across its surface, leaving behind faint trails. You see them as you break the biscuit, as you soak it, even after it's been softened. You might try to pick them out, a futile exercise in futility. It's like trying to empty the ocean with a thimble. Your shipmates, the older hands, have long since given up this battle. They offer you the grim wisdom these creatures are resilient. They often survived even prolonged soaking, clinging stubbornly to their hardtack homes, swimming in your coffee, or simply waiting to be swallowed. You might find yourself in a moment of utter exhaustion and grim humour, telling yourself it's extra protein. A macabre joke, yes, but one that helps you push past the overwhelming disgust. A small mental trick to make the unpalatable palatable. This isn't just a snack, it's an unwilling collaboration with the insect world. It's in moments like these that sailors develop the grim mantra, "Don't look, just eat." You learn to avert your gaze, to dim the light if possible, to simply close your eyes and focus on the act of chewing and swallowing, pushing down the visual and textural repugnance. Your stomach grumbles with genuine hunger overriding the protests of your eyes and your mind. This constant battle against infestation, against the very nature of your staple food, is a daily reminder of the dire conditions and the sheer will required to simply consume enough to survive. Every bite is a negotiation, every meal a testament to your diminishing standards and increasing desperation. You're not just eating for energy. You're eating to defy the sea, to defy the company's indifference, to prove that you, a human, can outlast even the weevils. And after forcing down this gritty, chitin-laden sustenance, your throat often feels like parchment, your mouth bone dry. You crave desperately anything to wash it down, to cleanse your palate, to rehydrate your parched body. This brings you back to the most fundamental and precarious of all resources, water. After forcing down that gritty, chitin-laden sustenance you call hardtack, your throat often feels like parchment, your mouth bone dry. You crave desperately anything to wash it down, to cleanse your palate, to rehydrate your parched body. And this brings you back yet again to the most fundamental and precarious of all resources, water. You've heard the grim stories, witnessed the reality, but the daily ritual of confronting your drinking water never truly loses its unsettling edge. Stored in those massive wooden casks deep in the hold, the water which began its journey as something merely stale quickly turned foul. After just a month at sea, sometimes even less, it becomes thick with algae and wriggling with tiny creatures. Imagine the greenish tint, the faint unpleasant movement you see as you dip your cup. It's a brackish, often rancid liquid, tasting metallic and bitter, often with a faint earthy tang of decay. Each swallow is a conscious act of defiance against your own body's revulsion. You learn quickly and grimly to filter this murky liquid through gritted teeth, or through a scrap of cloth, anything to remove the larger, more visible impurities. It's a small, desperate effort to make the unpalatable merely tolerable. This is not the refreshing clean water of your farm stream. This is a liquid struggle, a daily reminder of how far you've fallen from basic comfort. The taste lingers, a constant presence that makes you long for something, anything, to wash it away. You might have thought water was simply water, but out here it's a precious corrupted commodity, a source of both sustenance and profound disgust. During those harrowing periods of rationing when the sun beats down relentlessly and the winds refuse to blow, the scarcity becomes so severe that the desperate acts you witnessed early on become commonplace. You've seen men fight over the last drops in the bottom of the drinking barrel, their faces contorted with a primal thirst, civility utterly forgotten in the face of such profound need. These aren't just quarrels, they are stark visceral explosions of human desperation, a testament to how quickly the veneer of order can crumble when the most fundamental need for survival is threatened. You hoard your own meagre ration, guarding it with fierce protectiveness, your eyes darting always wary, knowing that the man next to you, a friend just moments before, might become an adversary for a few milliliters of liquid. Yet amidst this pervasive degradation, there is one small, almost sacred ritual that offers a brief, potent escape, the daily ration of watered-down brandy. It's often served in the evening, a small measure diluted to extend its supply. This isn't for revelry, it's a crucial coping mechanism. The initial burn as it goes down temporarily numbs your taste buds mercifully, dulling the lingering metallic tang of the foul water and the memory of mouldy hardtack. More importantly, it seems to dull the constant muscle aches that plague your body, the persistent throb in your hands, the stiffness in your back. It offers a brief, potent escape from the psychological torment, a fleeting moment where the harsh realities of the ship fade slightly into a warm, blurry haze. It's the only saving grace, a small fire in the belly against the cold, damp misery of the ship. You cling to it, savouring each sip, knowing that this small measure of artificial comfort is all you have to push through another day, another week. This grim cycle of poor sustenance, from putrid food to foul water and the fleeting relief of brandy, is a daily testament to the company's indifference. It's a stark contrast to the quiet dignity of your former life, where personal care, however rustic, was still a possibility. This grim cycle of poor sustenance, from putrid food to foul water and the fleeting relief of brandy, is a daily testament to the company's indifference to your well-being. Yet perhaps nothing highlights this indifference quite as powerfully as the utter lack of basic hygiene and personal care aboard the ship, a reality that chips away at more than just your dignity. It slowly erodes your health and your very sense of self. You might recall with a poignant ache that even your farm life, while certainly not luxurious, offered a basic, if rustic, level of personal care. Yes, you had the persistent smell of manure permanently embedded in his clothes, from dairy farming, an occupational hazard you barely noticed, but you also had access to fresh, clean water, to a basin, to the simple act of washing away the day's grime. This rustic reality in hindsight was a paradise of cleanliness, compared to the extreme lack of hygiene you would now encounter at sea, making the clean water of your youth a distant, almost mythical memory. Your first true immersion into collective filth, however, came not on the ship but in the Amsterdam recruit cellar. You remember it, don't you? The moment you stepped inside, the dominant smell hits you, instantly a pungent, suffocating mix of unwashed bodies, stale beer and something worse beneath it all. It was a visceral assault, a dense, unpleasant atmosphere that served as a grim prelude to the even more extreme sensory attack of shipboard life. You learned there in that dim subterranean space to tune out the stench, to accept the grime, to mentally disconnect from the physical reality of your surroundings. It was a conditioning, a slow desensitization that prepared you for the far greater challenge of maintaining any semblance of personal cleanliness in an environment utterly devoid of the means to do so. You clung to the memory of clean linen, of fresh air, knowing that these luxuries were now impossibly distant. Aboard ship, proper hygiene, as you understood it from your farm, was virtually non-existent for common sailors. You were lucky if you managed a cold wash, when the weather was calm enough to draw a bucket of seawater and splash it over yourself on deck. But facilities for proper bathing, a full wash, soap-clean water privacy, were simply absent. The very idea would have been laughable. This chronic lack of cleansing, combined with the close quarters and the sheer number of bodies, led to a pervasive miasma that was a constant companion. It was a suffocating blend of bodily odours, the stench of unwashed clothing, and the lingering sourness of stale vomit and unmentionable wastes. This constant thick air not only assaulted your senses, making breathing feel like an act of endurance, but also contributed significantly to the rampant spread of disease among the closely packed crew. A cough, a fever, a skin ailment all found fertile ground in this perpetually unclean environment. Your clothes, once somewhat clean, quickly became stiff with salt sweat, and grime turning into rough, irritating segunda peel. The primitive nature of the heads, those crude holes over the bow, offered minimal privacy, and were fully exposed to the elements. You'd find yourself clinging to the rails, enduring the spray, or the sun, trying to relieve yourself with some shred of dignity, even as others passed by. During rough seas or storms, these facilities became utterly unusable, forcing men to resort to buckets in the crew quarters. Imagine the horror, the profound loss of personal space, as a shipmate perhaps just feet from you attends to his bodily functions in the shared reeking darkness. This practice, a necessity born of extreme circumstances, only intensified the already overwhelming stench and created a dangerously unsanitary environment for all. It chipped away at your sense of self, reducing you to a mere animal, responding to basic urges with no thought for social norms or personal dignity. You, a man who once knew the quiet solitude of the privy behind the bar, now found yourself stripped bare, both literally and figuratively, in the harsh, unforgiving world of the VOC ship. This constant physical degradation, this slow erasure of the familiar comforts and decencies of your past, had tangible, painful consequences. This constant physical degradation, this slow erasure of the familiar comforts and decencies of your past, had tangible, painful consequences manifesting directly on your body. Beyond the general discomfort and the lingering stench, the complete lack of hygiene and the tropical environment conspire to turn minor irritations into serious threats. Imagine, for instance, the relentless assault of biting insects. As your ship ventures into the warmer, more humid waters, especially near the equator or in the East Indies, swarms of mosquitoes, flies and tiny gnats materialize seemingly from nowhere. They are everywhere, drawn to the warmth, the moisture, and the scent of unwashed bodies. They land on your exposed skin during watches in the dim light below decks, and relentlessly attack while you try to snatch a few hours of sleep. Each bite or pinprick at first quickly develops into an itchy welt. You scratch instinctively, furiously, only to make it worse. In the pervasive damp heat of the tropics, these minor irritations, these infuriatingly itchy welts quickly grow infected. Without access to clean water to wash the wounds, without antiseptic, without even a clean cloth to cover them, a simple mosquito bite can transform into a weeping, inflamed sore. The salt from the sea spray, far from being cleansing, often just irritates it, further stinging and burning. You watch as a shipmate's arm, once covered in just a few red spots, becomes a tapestry of festering wounds, swollen and painful radiating heat. This isn't just an annoyance. It's a constant visible reminder of your body's vulnerability, a gateway for fever and more serious illness. You constantly check your own skin, looking for signs, trying to resist the urge to scratch, knowing full well the painful consequences. This relentless physical degradation, the slow but sure erosion of your body's integrity, was a constant reminder of your own fragility and the harshness of your existence. Every cut, every scrape, every insect bite carries a far greater risk than it ever would on land. A simple rope burn, a common occurrence during the grueling labour, could easily turn septic, leading to a debilitating infection that might sideline you or worse, send you to the rudimentary sickbay where few truly recover. The constant dampness, the pervasive grime, and the inability to properly clean and care for even the smallest wound means that your body is in a perpetual state of siege. You feel your own skin often chafed and sore, your hands perpetually cracked and rough, your feet perpetually damp and prone to sores. This is the unseen cost of neglect, a quiet suffering that compounds the more overt dangers of the sea. The company's indifference to your basic human needs for clean water, for sanitation, for simple care, is now visibly etched onto your skin, a map of hardship and risk. Your body, once strong and resilient from farm labour, is now a canvas of minor afflictions, each one a potential path to a far greater malady. You are a biological machine constantly breaking down with insufficient means for repair. This daily struggle against the insidious creep of infection and discomfort means that even when you're not battling a storm or hauling a sail, your body is still fighting a war, a constant low-grade battle for survival. And all this physical torment is against the backdrop of an unyielding daily grind, the relentless physical labour that defined every waking hour. And all this physical torment from poor hygiene and constant insect bites is against the backdrop of an unyielding daily grind, the relentless physical labour that defined every waking hour. You remember the predictable, albeit tiring rhythm of farm work, but that was a different kind of exertion altogether. Your previous life on the farm was indeed defined by the endless monotony of rural life. Imagine, if you will, the comforting predictability of milking cows before dawn, the familiar chill of the morning air against your hands, the rhythmic squirt of milk into the pail, or the steady heavy pull of a plough through damp earth, the reassuring weight of the soil, the direct connection of your labour to the seasons and the land. While physically demanding this labour had a purpose, you could immediately see a predictable rhythm that was in tune with nature's cycles, not the arbitrary demands of a ship's officer. It was a stark contrast to the often brutal and utterly alien tasks of seafaring a world where your connection to the earth was severed, replaced by an unforgiving, unstable wooden realm. Life aboard the VOC ship, you quickly discover, demands relentless physical labour, a constant, bone-wearing exertion that never truly seems to end. From the moment the first bell rings to wake you from your fitful sleep until you collapse back onto the hard deck, hours later your body is in constant motion. You spend your days scrubbing decks, often on hands and knees, battling the pervasive grime and saltwater stains, your back aching from the endless stooping in the low crew quarters. Imagine the coarse bristles of the brush, the cold, gritty seawater, the endless repetitive motion under a sun that bakes the deck or a wind that chills you to the bone. Then there's the constant hauling ropes, thick abrasive hemp lines that cut into your hands, leaving them raw and bleeding. Despite the calluses you quickly develop, each sail needs trimming, each yard arm needs adjusting, and the sheer effort required to manipulate these massive canvas and rope systems is immense. You are also perpetually mending sails, often in precarious positions high above the deck, clinging to rigging that sways violently with the ship's motion. The canvas is stiff, heavy, and unforgiving, and the needles are thick, demanding strength and precision from hands that are constantly trembling from exhaustion. And of course there's the ceaseless pumping bilge water, a back-breaking monotonous task performed deep in the ship's bowels, clearing the foul stagnant water that inevitably seeps into the lowest parts of the vessel. The air down there is thick with a stench of decay and damp wood. The only sound, the rhythmic squeak and splash of the pump. These aren't just tasks, they are tests of endurance, each one demanding every ounce of your physical strength and mental fortitude. Your farm-calloused hands, once accustomed to the familiar roughness of wood and soil, now bleed from the rough hemp ropes, each new cut a searing pain that merges with the existing network of scars. Your back, once merely tired from bending over the fields, now feels permanently bent from the constant stooping required in the low crew quarters, a permanent ache that settles deep into your spine. The work is endless, punishing, and often overseen by officers who show little mercy to new recruits. You quickly learn that mistakes, even minor ones, are met with curses or the lash. A fumbled knot, a moment of hesitation, a slow response. These are not opportunities for instruction, but for immediate brutal correction. It's a harsh education in obedience and efficiency delivered with a stinging physical emphasis that burns into your memory. This relentless physical strain is almost unbearable, yet you will soon discover that the very structure of the day imposed by the ship's bell offers no real respite, only broken fragments of rest. This relentless physical strain from scrubbing decks to hauling ropes is almost unbearable, yet you will soon discover that the very structure of the day imposed by the ship's bell offers no real respite, only broken fragments of rest. On the farm, your rhythm was dictated by the sun and the needs of the animals' dawn-dusk, the slow march of the seasons. Here on the ocean, your life is governed by a metallic clang, a harsh, unwavering sound that slices through the ship's groans and the ocean's roar. The ship's bell imposes a merciless schedule, dividing your day into 4-hour watches. Imagine it. Perhaps you're on duty from 4 to 8 a.m., then again from 4 to 6 p.m. It seems structured a predictable cycle of labour and rest, but the reality is far more brutal than any schedule could suggest. You learn to move by instinct, your body responding to the bell before your mind has even fully awakened. You stumble to your station, your muscles stiff, your eyes gritty from too little sleep, your mind a dull fog. The 4 hours on watch are an exercise in endurance. The cold bite of the wind, the endless tasks, the constant vigilance. Then the blessed relief of the bell signalling the end of your watch, promising a few hours of precious uninterrupted rest. You crawl back to your cramped space below decks, hoping for oblivion, for the sweet release of deep sleep. However, this seemingly structured routine is frequently, almost constantly, disrupted by calls for all hands. A sudden squall on the horizon, a shift in wind that demands immediate sail, changes the sighting of a suspicious vessel that might be a pirate or a rival. Any emergency, large or small, means every available man is called on deck, regardless of whether it's your watch or your designated rest period. Imagine being jolted awake from a shallow doze, the insistent shouts of all hands on deck, piercing through the darkness, the urgent scramble of feet above you. The brief window you had for sleep is violently shattered. Adrenaline flooding your system as you clamber up the ladder, your heart pounding your mind, still trying to separate dream from reality. You work until the immediate danger or task is resolved, often for hours, only to be dismissed again, your body now even more exhausted, your mind even more frayed. This means that genuine restorative sleep comes only in broken fragments. You might get an hour here, 2 hours there, but rarely a continuous stretch of deep slumber. The ship itself conspires against rest, the constant creaking and groaning of the timbers, the rhythmic slap of waves against the hull, the scurrying of rats, the snores and coughs of your bunkmates, the stifling heat or the biting cold. You never truly escape the environment, even in sleep. You lie on the hard deck, your body aching, your mind unable to fully shut down, always on alert for the next call, the next alarm. The very act of attempting to rest becomes another form of labour, another battle against the ship and its demands. Veteran sailors like Peter, their eyes holding the quiet resignation of chronic fatigue, confirm your grim experience. He might nod to you one morning, a weary smile on his lips, and remark almost casually that he hasn't slept more than 3 hours straight in 15 years at sea. 15 years. The sheer weight of that statement hangs in the air, a testament to the perpetual exhaustion that becomes a sailor's baseline. It's not just feeling tired, it's profound bone-deep weariness that permeates every thought, every action, every fibre of your being. Judgment becomes clouded tempers fray easily, and even the simplest tasks feel monumental. You live in a haze, your body demanding rest. It never truly gets your mind struggling to keep pace. This constant state of sleep deprivation, combined with the poor diet, the lack of hygiene, and the back-breaking labour, forms a cumulative assault on your very essence. You become a shadow of your former self, driven by instinct and sheer will, perpetually dreaming of a long, undisturbed night's rest. This unyielding grind defines your transformation from a farm boy into a hardened sailor, a man shaped by the sea's demands and the company's iron rule. But even in this harsh existence, amidst the endless demands and dangers, there are fleeting moments where human spirit and ingenuity find ways to adapt, to learn and to grow. As the last echoes of the ship's bell fade and the endless roll of the ocean recedes from your mind's ear, allow yourself to gently drift back to the quiet comfort of your own time. The brutal realities of the 17th century VOC sailor, a life of relentless hardship and profound personal cost, now belong to the distant past. You, safely nestled in your own haven, can feel the steady ground beneath you, breathe air that is clean and fresh, and perhaps even reach for a glass of cool, clean water. The struggle for survival, the gnawing hunger, the constant vigilance against disease and storm, these are but historical whispers now dissolving into the peaceful hum of your present. Let the imagery of hardtack and foul water soften. Let the phantom aches of labour melt away. As the stars begin to emerge in your own night sky, or the gentle light of morning filters through your window, remember the resilience forged in those perilous journeys, the human spirit that endured against all odds. Allow these thoughts to gently guide you deeper into slumber or into a peaceful day. The stories of the past are rich and deep, but the comfort of your present is a precious gift. Rest now, knowing you are far, far from the restless waves and the demanding bell.